Hi guys, this film is called Work-Life Balance on Lithium, during taking lithium. I did a film just previous on the last series that I did about work-life balance before lithium. So this is kind of quite a long story. I'm going to start from the beginning and try and kind of guide you through the 7 or 8 years that I've done different jobs and how it started, how it developed, how things changed over time during taking my medication. But firstly, I wanted to comment on some of the wonderful comments that I've been getting from you guys online with my latest series. Been getting some really positive feedback, some really interesting comments about things that I could talk about. So thank you so much for that, and I will be putting that into place as I continue making these films. So let's get started. So the beginning stages of me going on medication, I would say that my work-life balance was very out of kilter. Um, on Olanzapine especially, I couldn't work yet. It was the very beginning of me having been manic and psychotic, and I'd come out of 3 weeks of the mental health hospital, and I was still going through a period of lots of downs and panic attacks. Um, I was going through a stage in my life where I didn't have energy for friendships. So what I would call as a life balance there was really off. So my daughter was at school, my husband was at work. I'd spend a lot of time on my own. And especially at the beginning, I was seeing a mental health nurse. So I'd see her. She was like someone I would see quite regularly, and that was really nice and very comforting. But apart from that, I didn't have like a huge amount of kind of outside input, and I did in time get more confident, was able to go out on my own and go into town, do some shopping, go to a cafe maybe. And then when I started taking lithium, um, I was weaning myself off olanzapine. That was still a difficult patch for me, getting it right. No one told me about how you should be having your blood test 12 hours after, as much as you can accurately from taking your pill. So that took quite a long time to transition for me. And so it was only when I was completely on lithium and no more olanzapine that I was able to start thinking about going back to work. And for me, going back to my teaching job, I think I was on 4 days a week before I stopped working from the manic episode in the summer that I had in the school year, as it were. Yeah, I wasn't supported at work, kind of mentally, emotionally, and with kind of work issues that came up, and I decided for me that it wouldn't be best to go back to that same job. I didn't have the confidence for that. I wasn't ready for kind of 5 lessons a day with nearly 30 children in each lesson. It was just too much for me, and I couldn't envisage doing that. So I had kind of other ideas of what I could do for my work. I was a seamstress, still am a seamstress at times. I still make my own clothes. This is something I made earlier. And yeah, so this is a long story, obviously. I'm not going to tell you everything. But I set up a business with my mum. We set up a shop in Henley, and slowly over time I was able to become kind of shop manager, and I made clothes for the ladies of Henley, made to measure. But at the beginning that was still kind of patchy because I would still have panic attacks during work, and so other people at first were kind of the shop manager and taking over that kind of role of being more responsible. And at the beginning I was just kind of trying to get through the day, and I'm trying to regain a kind of pattern of work and having enough energy for that, and kind of building up my confidence that I can be around other people and kind of seem what I kind of thought was maybe normal, with the public, and you know, having enough time after work and the weekends to just kind of rest, recuperate, learn how, you know, to talk with my husband in more detail about my emotions and my feelings about things. And you know, so it was like a huge learning curve, that beginning patch. Let me ponder on how this kind of changed and moved forward. So bear with me. So work-life balance. So yeah, I continued working in that shop for about 2 years, working not that much with my mum because she had 2 or 3 other businesses. But there were other people working there, and living in Henley, I didn't have a kind of base of friends really. It just it didn't really happen. I kind of felt like it wasn't really the place for me to find kind of like-minded people. I had like a couple of people that I might go to a drink with, and I had some old friends that I would still meet up with and have fun times with. But it didn't, there was something about living there that just didn't feel quite right. And that's when me and my husband started to plan to move to France, and to find somewhere new for us to start our life. But coming back to work, that did change. So when I left the shop, I found a job back in a school because I was missing education, I was missing young people, I was missing that kind of energy of being in a school environment. And I found a really great job in an all-girls school called the Holt School in Wokingham. And instead of being a teacher, I was a design and technology assistant. So in that role, I was working with plastics, metals, fabrics, the sewing machines, you know, so textiles, woodwork, graphics, all that. So I was helping basically the teachers with their projects, ordering stuff in. So I had admin tasks on the computer, but I still had times when I would go into the classroom with small groups of kids, and they'd come into my workshop space, and they'd ask me for things, I'd get things. So it was a bit more laid back, it was less pressure, less, no planning, no kind of home work that I had to do like you do as a teacher, but I was still in that environment. And I was bringing yoga to a small group of kids that were, what would you call them? There was, I think, 6 girls. They were kind of the girls that kind of struggled with the school environment, struggled with work, struggled emotionally and mentally, and yeah, we had a great time together. I taught them all sorts of things. We did some yoga, we talked about stuff, and yeah, we did some cooking classes about how to be healthy and all this kind of thing. And I was doing a couple of times, I did some huge yoga classes in the big hall with like 70 girls for, what's it called? International Yoga Day. So that was fun. I kind of developed yoga a bit more within that school, so I brought my own aspect to that work. And living in Wokingham for a year, which was a move we made to make some money to move to France, to downsize into a 2-bedroom flat. Again, there, did I feel like I had a work-life balance? Again, I didn't make a huge amount of friends. I still went out and did stuff, but my life was more about my daughter, my husband, my family, going out and spending some time with my mum and her side of the family. I still had my old mates, but yeah, it kind of felt transitory, and we knew we were leaving the country, so yeah, life was about work and setting up our new life, finding a place to live here on the internet, buying a van, you know, packing up boxes, how long we were going to stay there for, you know, so these kind of things were moving and developing. We had plans, but my own kind of fun time, I suppose, was still kind of lacking. I did lots of sewing, I was still creative, and I still had a life, but it kind of it wasn't kind of going out and having meals and going to the pub and you know, chatting lots with people and staying up late. It wasn't that kind of thing, you know. It was kind of still low key. But I remember 3 years on, and I was in Wokingham, and I went for a walk, and I was obviously on lithium, but I'd come down from that period where I'd been kind of toxic, and I dropped my level. And I remember walking along the road thinking, I feel so kind of steady, level, calm. Um, I just felt so much better in myself mentally, and obviously making plans and things that felt really good. And we kind of felt like we were putting things into place that was for us as a family and for our future, that felt right for us. And yeah, so that was a really good time. And work ticked along really nicely at that school, and I worked there for 2 years before we moved to France. And just before leaving that job, I actually had enough confidence within myself to start teaching again. So literally for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I was kind of a cover teacher, and I had a timetable and I did some planning, but it was still kind of low key because they weren't really my classes that I was taking forward. I knew I was leaving, but it was great to know that I could still be a teacher if I wanted to, and I could still perform in a kind of classroom scenario, and have, you know, behaviour issues and be able to deal with that, you know, with the kids in my class. And we were doing cooking classes where you've got like to create like a whole cake within an hour and wash up, and you know, I hadn't really taught many of those classes because I was a textiles teacher, and that's pretty intense, and I was able to manage it and cope with that. So that just showed how far I'd come within 4 years of being on lithium. So yeah, another pause to ponder. Okay, so moving to France, we had 12 weeks living in a van, so that was basically just living and no work. We had a bit of savings from selling our flat, and it was just all about trying to find somewhere to live here. So that was completely different, and it felt very free. We didn't know where we were going to park the van to sleep that night, and we felt a bit like gypsies. Um, and you know, we were kind of washing in streams and swimming in lakes to wash ourselves, and going to laundrettes, or just washing things by hand for our clothes. We had all of our stuff from our home in storage in my dad's warehouse, workshop, and so we were kind of living very minimally, and it was a complete change. So yeah, there was the work-life balance was completely the opposite. There was no work and loads of life, centered around my close family, my husband and my daughter. Because at the time, you know, we were coming to a new country. I had no new friends or anything, but I do have some family here in France, so we were spending time with them, and that was good. And yeah, so that was completely different. And then in time, we found this home reasonably quickly. Everything went through with a sale, and then that first year of living in France, this was 3 years ago. That first year, I worked 4 jobs at the same time once I'd got a role on it. So I was working, making clothes, organic ladies' clothing to sell in a market stand. I was looking after a house nearby in a local town where I was gardening and making sure the house was okay. He was going off to India for a number of months, and I had to sort that out. What else was I doing? I was working in an organic farm, helping with the tomatoes and planting other plants, and so that was like a small team of like 3 or 4 of us. What else was I up to? Let me think. Yeah, and then right near the end of that year, my 4th job was starting to work in another educational setting in an alternative school that's a democratic school called École Plein Nature, and they're still going, and they're going full force now, kind of 2.5 years ahead, and blossoming. There's now 65 children there, from age 5 to 15, and my husband's now the director of that school. So coming up to the end of my 7 or 8 years on Lithium, things changed again. So that first year I was working 4 jobs. I was basically working way too hard, and we'd made a decision between me and my husband that he would have a year off work. He'd been working 9 years a teacher in England, and we were coming here to France, and he wanted to spend that first year to really paint, because he's a painter, he's a musician, he's very creative. So he was going off in the little car in the countryside, painting in nature, and creating all this beautiful artwork. And so I was like bringing in the bacon so that we weren't using up all of our savings, and yeah, I think kind of it wasn't really, there was pressure in moving country. There was a lot to do, and that was on me, but it was also exciting. So it was like that kind of mixture, and then coming here, working really hard to keep things going. The work-life balance was completely off, and and what am I trying to say? That basically that was a huge learning curve for me again that first year, and that you know, these last 3 years I've learnt so much, and obviously, and I tumbled down into illness with the Lyme's disease. So that came at the end of that first year. I was bitten loads by I'd had 7 tick bites, and I'd also had, looking after that house nearby, real big problem with what they called fleas, and I'd had to kind of bomb the house and spray it and do all sorts of things, and the car that I was using at the time, so I had loads of bites all over me, and I know you can get Lyme's through that. So so then my health went really downhill, and work-life balance went completely the opposite. I still tried to continue working, but my energy levels like plummeted, and then I went into a long period of really intense physical pains in my body, and I was in bed a lot, and yeah, so that actually takes us through the lithium, because a year after having Lyme's disease, that's when I started to decide to withdraw and come off lithium. So you can see that it was kind of a bit of a roller coaster along the way of the 7 or 8 years, and my work-life balance was like changing all the time, dependent on what my life was doing. And there's been a lot of changes, and I guess life is always changing, and with some of you guys taking lithium, you might have less like physical changes of your surroundings than what I have had in the last 7 or 8 years, but you might still, I don't know if you feel like you get stuck in a rut in your work-life balance, or if you feel like, I don't know, there's parts of your personal life that you might want to develop and allow that to grow, and maybe spend more time socializing and finding groups of people or clubs to go to, so that you can develop your friendships and go further with that, so that you really nourish yourself as a kind of human being. And I think, and I'm only just kind of starting to realize quite how important that is for me. And there are times when, yeah, I haven't been nourished by my personal life, and how things can become out of balance, and then you're not feeling like this whole rounded person that's experiencing life in lots of different ways. You know, maybe you're at home too much, or maybe you spend too much time alone, or maybe you're working too hard and there isn't so much time for rest. You're not giving yourself that time for rest, and and kind of enjoyment, so that you can boost up your energy and continue forward, and then work well and be kind of productive in your work life. So all of this is really, really important, and I'll talk more about it in my next film. So my next film is work-life balance post-lithium. After lithium, yeah. So I'll talk about that more, and how I've been able to now really have much more of a stable, equal balance between working and my personal life and life in general, because life isn't just personal life, it's lots of different things. So that's coming up next. I hope that was interesting for you, and please do comment below and tell me anything that you're struggling with work-life balance, or things that work really well for you, and why do you think that is. Yeah, let's hear about it. Let's have a discussion below. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next film. Bye.